So, hello everyone, I'm Andrei. I'm the architect and founder of Animo Regis, a Bucharest-based architecture and interior design firm that generally caters to global clients, with most of the projects being currently in the US. This will be a general presentation on the metaverse, a general overview. Let me see if this works. And this is what we're going to go through. We're going to look at the metaverse definition, broad as that may be, the relationship to video games, because that is an overlap we are seeing very constantly, the role of VR, and then we're going to discuss a bit about the current landscape, the state of architecture in the metaverse, and a bit about any potential opportunities that might be available. So let's start with possibly one of the broadest issues, the definition. Right now, if you go on Google and you search this exact query of what is the metaverse, you're going to have a plethora of answers ranging from general to slightly more specific. But as it stands right now, because this is such a new field, there is no consensus on a single definition. Whoever you ask, they're going to say something slightly different, although in the same broad spectrum. However, we can look at the established metaverses and start to create a framework definition based on their general characteristics. Specifically, when I mean established, I mean the Sandbox and the Decentraland, as these have been basically around the longest. A metaverse at its core is a cyberspace created from the ground up to be user or player driven. Now, again, that is very broad, so we need to define it further. It needs to have three main characteristics to be a metaverse. It needs to be user-controlled, user-owned, and have a user-centric economy. This is what puts it in contrast with something like an online video game, which does not have these things. So that's the general distinction. Now, going it a bit deeper, user-controlled means is that the users are the ones that decide how to interact with the world. It's not something that's programmed by a developer. User-owned means that it's the users, the players that own the metaverse, and they decide the direction it takes. And finally, a user-centric economy means that the users participate financially and economically in the metaverse. They can spend money, they can earn money. It's not just for playing. This is right now the broad definition, but as we move through time, this might very well change and become better defined. So you're going to see this a lot. When you Google about the metaverse, invariably what you're going to come across is the comparison to a video game. And it's kind of easy to understand why. It's because they kind of look the same. It's like a screenshot from the Decentraland or Polka City. You're immediately going to think, oh, video game, controller, that sort of stuff. But they're very different. A video game at its core has a gameplay loop system, which is essentially a series of problems and tools programmed by the developer for the player. A metaverse does not have this. A metaverse is designed with the idea of possibility or tools in mind, and it does not create artificial problems for the user to solve. It's the user that decides how to interact with the cyberspace. There are two examples right now of online games that are very, very similar to metaverses, and that is EVE Online and Second Life. This comparison comes from the fact that they are so broad in their systems that they start kind of blur the line between the two. But both of these are still games because developers control the interaction, developers own the space. Yes, players can earn some money, they can maybe vote on how things change, but they have no ultimate control. The developer has the ultimate control. Another aspect you're going to see a lot is the role of VR in the metaverse. Now, Meta, formerly Facebook, is the key driver behind this. It's Meta that really pushes this idea that VR is the next big thing, that VR is going to take the world, that VR is basically going to become as ubiquitous as a smartphone. Right now, the VR base is quite niche. If you look at this graph, this is one source. It kind of puts it around between 35 to 45 million headsets available globally. When you compare that to, let's say, number of laptops, smartphones, iPhones, gamers in the world, whatever, the figure starts to kind of look a bit paltry in comparison. So VR adoption is still niche at this point. And possibly the most, let's say, damning proof of this is that Meta's own project, Horizon Worlds, its own metaverse, is now only available in VR, but they're also working on a web version at the moment. So when you compare the amount of VR headsets to, let's say, the number of video gamers, you start to see the figure, and VR still has a long way to go before it becomes as ubiquitous as Meta wants it to be. So that's video games in VR. What is the current landscape and what does it currently look like? So Meta launched Horizon Worlds, which is, let's say, the first step of their big metaverse project. Right now, it's not really a metaverse, it's a social app. It's basically Facebook in 3D. That's the simplest way to describe it. It doesn't really have any of the characteristics of a metaverse. It's still a product that a company builds for its users. The users log in and they can enjoy the activities, but that's where it stops. Now, Meta is saying that this is step one of a multi-year project right now to implement the metaverse. They spent around $10 billion in 2021 on metaverse developments. This is also the reason why their stock price tanked, so on and so forth. And they're kind of aiming the 2030s as this time frame when it's all going to come together. That's Meta. However, there are other metaverses that are established, namely the Sandbox and Decentraland. These have been in development for quite a while. They are almost fully available to users. They're very much still work in progress, and they just keep adding more and more features as they move on. However, these do have the characteristics of a metaverse. So, for example, users can buy a plot of land in Decentraland, hire an architect, design a building, rent that building, so on and so forth. They're still starting, they're still quite limited, so everything is still in development. And an issue that metaverses have is that these are only really at the moment popular in the crypto niche. So there's really no mainstream breakthrough at this moment. This is why Meta is pushing this very aggressively, you might say. But right now, they're still very much in the crypto space. However, other companies are looking at this. And even though they're not jumping into the metaverse, they're starting to bring in metaverse style features, let's say. An example of this is the famous Travis Scott concert in Fortnite, where it was this big event with music and users can log in and see the concert and participate. So funnily enough, this concert is kind of the closest we've come to like that big metaverse idea of everything that's happening in real life happens in the cyberspace and so on. So very much still development. On the architectural front, and here is where we can talk even more broadly on the whole design front of the metaverse. Again, still very much work in progress. Everything is still in infancy. Generally, graphic and art styles are very much still simplistic and basic. However, even when you take out engine limitations, realistically right now, the design still leaves much to be desired. And there's a lot more room for improvement where one of the potential opportunities also lies. Possibly the best example of this is VR Kingle's Viceverse building in the metaverse. Big VR Kingle's group is one of the most prominent architecture firms in the world at the moment, and they were contracted by Vice to design their headquarters in Decentraland. Everything was done, it was designed. However, when you take this final design and you compare it to something that Big has actually built, this is the Christophos Museum, it was built in 2019. It's basically a steel wonder, how they managed to bend it. You can kind of see where the design falls short. For a space that is supposed to have infinite possibility and be detached almost completely from any constraints of real world, it starts to kind of fall short. And there's a lot more room to expand on the design of the metaverse and everything else. For my part, the metaverse has replaced architectural competitions, mainly when it comes to concept study and concept creation. In all creative fields, there is the, let's say, mainstream component, and then there's the high thinking component. The best example of this is the fashion world, which has couture, Paris Fashion Week, where they experiment with concepts, ideas, directions that they will then further implement in the mainstream lines. Automotive sports have these as well. Formula One is basically kind of like a testing ground for engine developments that can be then further used in the real world. Up until this point, competitions were the realm of this experimentations, but competitions tend to be very limited for architects because people don't engage with your design. Yes, you make a concept, you present it, but that's where it stops. So I personally have been using the Metaverse as basically the best testing ground for concepts. So building concepts, seeing what potential issues we can run into when building them in real life. And then also seeing once they are placed in the metaverse, how users interact with it, but also seeing clients' reaction and clients' openness to experimental ideas. When you design a real world building, there's not really a lot of room for experimentation due to budget constraints. The crazier something is, the more expensive it is. So it's very difficult to kind of put complex concepts and not have the builder or the client go gasp in horror. So this has been proven to be very effective because these can be put in front of the client and see a reaction knowing that building this costs quarter of a fraction of building the real thing. What this is kind of taught to kind of draw a conclusion is that clients have to be very much more conservative in what they're looking for rather than being open. And this was one of the strangest things when starting with the metaverse is that for a space with infinite possibility, clients tend to be very conservative, almost as conservative as if they were building it in real life. So this is generally where we're at. And to kind of close things off, let's talk about the opportunities. The biggest opportunity lies in the lack of a definition. Because this is not a defined space, it has no defined purpose, but there are many places where it can fall into. This is by far the biggest chance for improvement and getting involved in the market. Right now, what the field needs is creativity, as much creativity as possible, because realistically, the money is already into the field. This is right now in 2022, the metaverse was valued at around $64 billion. Even if that figure is more likely slightly inflated, there's still a lot of money being thrown around into the field, but what it's lacking is creativity. Most of the experiments in the metaverse tend to be very conservative, and even Meta's whole concept is take activities that have been successful online and place them in VR in the metaverse. That is entirely what they're doing. So anyone that kind of has an idea, anyone that thinks they can do something creative, anyone thinks they can do something original, can find a spot into this. Now, there are many resources to kind of look if you want, let's say, the corporate overview, specifically McKinsey, which seems to be very involved with the metaverse, and they're going to run you through the whole traditional, well, this is what CEOs want, this is what companies want. Realistically, at this point, you do have some players like Meta, which have gone full into the metaverse, and most others which are kind of dipping their toes and waiting to see. There is still apprehension at what VR is and what VR will be. Some say, yes, this is the future. Some say, no. But fundamentally, that's irrelevant because I think is right. Sorry, can you mute that, or because it's right, so sorry about that. It was from someone else.
Yeah, sorry.
So there's a lot of anyone that's creative, anyone that can contribute can get into this as long as they have an idea and they want to develop something. You do have companies dipping their toes in. A lot of companies are dipping their toes in. Very few are going all in. but that still makes it a very much, fertile field for anyone looking to experiment. So you got an idea? You think you can contribute? By all means, please join in and do it. So that's kind of the general outlook. Thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Yes, Andrea, it's Jay.
Hi.
So I am a little bit confused. So is it the VR is the metaverse, or the VR is going to be the part of the metaverse?
It's a very good question because it's something that does come up a lot. The metaverse and VR are two separate things. The metaverse is the cyberspace, as it was shown. VR is one way in which you can interact with the metaverse, but it's not the only way, and it's not even the standard way. So let's take a metaverse, for example, like the Centraland. Right now, you can interact with the Centraland from the browser. They have a web app that you can use. You can interact from the installable app that you can install on a laptop, computer, so on and so forth. And you can even interact from your phone. I'm not sure they have VR interaction just yet, but we need to separate the two. Most metaverses are available on legacy devices. Most of them are available on legacy devices. VR is just one way of interacting with the metaverse. It's basically a channel.
Okay. Right. So metaverse is a virtual world where everybody can contribute. They can develop the things inside that.
Yes.
Okay, got it, got it. So now it's clear. Thank you.
Happy to help.
Yes, Andrew, it's Raj here.
Hi.
I would like to know how the metaverse will unfold and transform this into enterprises.
That's a very broad question. It's an excellent question. Again, the answer will differ based on who you ask. So at their last keynote presentation, Meta is, for example, 100% committed that VR is the next smartphone. Others are not so committed to that being true. Some companies like Coca-Cola, fashion companies, are experimenting a little bit. Others like the Central are jumping full in. Right now, you have a lot of players using it in a lot of different ways. So it's very difficult to kind of state what the metaverse will be and how it will impact enterprises in, let's say, 5 years' time or 3 years' time. But we can compare it to the early days of the internet in a way. Right now, I can only offer a personal opinion on how enterprises are going to use the metaverse. In my opinion, the metaverse is here to stay, but the way it's going to look is going to be fundamentally different from what it is right now. Right now, it's still just an online activity, but eventually it's going to be used mostly in a social aspect, in my opinion. So we're going to be using this as kind of the new social media, new way to interact, new way to look at things. So, for example, let's take online shopping. Right now, online shopping is a very utilitarian affair. You go on a website, you have X products. However, with the metaverse, you can turn this completely. You can have a virtual store where you can walk through, see the product, open it, hold it, explore it, and then decide if you want to do a purchase. You can even go far more experimental with, let's say, sizing, trying on, and raise that level of interactivity. That is fundamentally the best way enterprises can implement it. But that's still very different from being this big game changer to being a smaller but more subtle change. So I'm hoping this answered the questions. I know it's a little bit broad. I'm trying to clear up as much as possible based on what the current landscape is.
Right. And how useful, like how can we use it in an architectural part? Maybe to experience all the buildings by the masters, which can't be visited right now. Maybe the building is not ready to, like, still be experienced or something like that? Can be used like that, and or for the future buildings?
Yes, that is one use. So your answer right now ties perfectly into creativity. Something like what you just stated, I can see the use of it 100%. Nothing like that exists at this moment.
Right.
So can it be done? It will be very interesting for students to have a metaverse like this. Architecture students can build their designs and experiment with them. So all of a sudden, those tiny models you do out of cardboard in school become real items, and you can use it as a teaching method. They can go in and see. Right now, what it can do is open the experiential aspect of architecture to everyone, because everything that you just stated, we as architecture firms already do. So walkthroughs through unbuilt buildings, we already do that with clients, but they tend to be expensive and complex affairs. Doing this can open it to everyone. So why can't everyone experience this? Just, let's say, the rich few who can afford it.
Right. And maybe the Zaha Hadid buildings are more of a similar concept. Was that been used in her buildings?
Yes, Zaha Hadid has also, I think they are also involved with the metaverse. I'm not sure if they completed design yet. For the big firms like Birkin or Zaha Hadid, what kind of surprised me was that when you compare their real architecture, everything they've built, even their concepts, like the 1,000,001 concepts Big has, to what they've done in the metaverse, it's a bit strange that it's not more creative. That's what it is. But architecture firms are uniquely placed because all of us, from the biggest to the smallest, we have a million ideas in our drawers that we want to use. Those crazy designs that, we got told, no, too expensive. So architects are uniquely placed to design the metaverse, but it goes beyond that. It needs to be experiential. It can't just be a simple building. It needs, how do you interact? How do you feel? It's one aspect. There are more.
Right. And it's more often visual format than the experience, or like visual experience, than the feel and touch.
Yes. It's a visual experience, but also you can say an interaction experience, because you can walk into a building, and the beauty of it that you're not alone, right? You are one person, there are other people, and that brings it to life because you see how other people interact with it. It's a very big difference between seeing a building completely empty, like it's in the 3D renders, versus seeing it inhabited. If you look at all the fancy books, all of the photos of the buildings are empty, generally because it's more aesthetic. When you see it with people, it's a completely different experience. And this is something that the metaverse provides to architects that you don't really have access to. I mean, you can see how, put in 100 crazy people, see what they do. And that's invaluable because it's no longer just, stone, it's alive, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for answering so many queries, Andrei.
No problem. Happy to help.
So this Andrei, Jay again. So this experience, like walking into a store. So I'm going to walk through a store, let's say a clothing store, and maybe some other users are also walking. So that's what the interaction you are saying, that we may be able to see what they are doing and all.
Yes. I mean, this is something that, sorry.
Yes, it's like walking into a real store, where other buyers are also there.
Yes, that's the one layer that currently we cannot do at this moment. So the metaverse has the possibility to connect us better with other people, which is something social media tries to do, but you can argue doesn't really do it, even more alienates us. But we can make all of these experiences that are digital only, or very 2D, very flat, and all of a sudden bring them to life. So shopping is no longer, you sitting, in front of a laptop browsing a catalog. It's, you walk into your store, maybe your friend is in that store, and you both look at, items and things and, interact. So that is where it really has the capacity to bring in an additional level of interaction. That's something we kind of need nowadays, especially after the pandemic. that is, in my opinion, the one layer that is truly game changing. And you don't need VR for that. Like that could be on a laptop, phone, 3D,
Okay.
AR, whatever. But that's what I think is the real game changer, that level of interactivity.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Happy to help.
Hi, Andrei. It's Sam here. I just want to know, you said that metaverse, through the metaverse, we can experience the human-centered experience. So, how will the metaverse reframe? Is going to reframe the human-centered experiences?
Thank you for your question. It's a very, it's a very broad question. That could be a topic for a webinar in and of itself. More interesting, I would even say it's something that also I'm very interested in. Realistically, and you can go to the pandemic. The pandemic has really taught us a lot about how we interact with one another. Realistically, people are always drawn to people, and that's where the metaverse can help us. Like, it's about populating. So all of a sudden you're not one person with a laptop interacting with something. You have many more people around you interacting with the same thing or with the same activity or other activities in parallel alongside you. And that is the one experience. This idea of, let's say, a good parallel would be if you go to a plaza or a piazza or a town square, whatever, on a hot summer day, and you see all the people, walking around, taking photos, interacting. If you go to a day when there's no one, all of a sudden there's a very different feeling. The online world was never capable of recreating a natural level of interaction, like something you would see in a city up until now. This is the technology that can bring that level of interaction finally into the digital space. Yes, we've had webinars, for example. We've had live streamed concerts. We had online video games. But realistically, there was always that digital wall between people. While this does not completely break down that barrier, and you can argue that nothing really can, it's the one thing that's going to make it as thin as possible. So basically, you sharing experiences with or alongside people. That's something that's never been possible to do before. And it's the one place where the metaverse can really shake things up and bring us into a new form of the web, the real Web3, more than NFTs, cryptocurrency, and all the other stuff so far.
That's good.
Okay, Andre. Now I know I have the part of this webinar, but still I have one question. Since I'm in marketing, I just want to know how this metaverse can help or contribute in marketing, or to the people who are into marketing, or help establishing brands and all.
It differs a lot from brand to brand. Arguably, for visual products or visual brand like fashion houses, this is very, very powerful, because you can, if you go in, let's say, into a Gucci store, for example, there are two general things that make up the experience. One, it's the product, but it's also the building. So right now, for example, fashion brands can recreate that full experiences. They can also start to open up and use their traditional marketing tools that have been unopenable so far for a wider audience. For example, Fashion Week couture shows, which are only really basically attended by a very small number of people, can now be opened up to be experienced by others as well. That's the most obvious way for visual brands or brands that deal in visual products to use it. Other brands can really implement brand experiences. I think there's probably a better word for that, but it's the one that comes now, into the metaverse. So, for example, perfumes. Perfumes, when you look at a perfume advertisement, they can't really sell you the scent, right? It's something that's, we can't smell through the screen. So what they do is they create this image in a short video of what that scent inspires. Now take that, multiply by 100, and you create the experience. So all of a sudden you can create something like in, I don't know, the Central Land or Polka City or whatever, and you create an experience that kind of brings that scent closer to people. So it's basically the next step over the video. It's very wide and it can be quite deep. So this will depend from brand to brand. Where it's probably not going to be as helpful are some of the traditional brands that don't really benefit from advertising, like medical equipment or stuff like that. But those brands also can't rely on traditional advertising. So it's still there, basically.
Okay. So yeah, it quite answers my query, and maybe we'll be able to see the practicality of this within a year or two, I believe, the way it's growing.
It's difficult to say. It is growing. Right now, the problem isn't growth, it's direction. Because this is why I think that we need as many creative people as possible to get involved with this. Because even if you look at the large players like Meta, Meta's entire idea of the metaverse right now is, take ideas that work online, put them in VR, throw ungodly amounts of money at them, and get the product out. That's their entire logic. They're not like the iPhone or with Steve Jobs with the iPhone launch, which was revolutionary, and they went against the market. They're going with the market, which doesn't really serve them. Again, even if you look at the other metaverses like the Central Land, the Sandbox, Polka City, they do have a lack of creativity because, yes, they do have money, but the experiences tend to be flat. And this is coming from someone who had to use all of them, sometimes forced so. And that's what we kind of need. The more creative people get involved, the more clear ideas we have, the quicker we're going to shape that future.
Okay.